And we're live. Welcome, everyone. It's been a long time. It's been a really long time, far too long for this. And I'm back. I'm back with a bang. And today I have a special guest. I always say special guest, but today's guest is actually special. He's a friend of mine for several years now. We've been talking online. He's been doing his activism a little bit quietly. So now, for the first time, he's going to be coming on video to talk about some of the things he's experienced, his personal journey, and all of that. So, it is my great honor to introduce you to Tariq Elhaad. So, Tariq, how's it going?
Hey Abdullah, I'm glad we're finally doing this. We've been planning for this for a long time.
Absolutely. So before we get started, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background, just like a short summary.
So I was born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan. I have been in the U.S. for most of my life now. Came in the late '90s and currently living in Seattle.
Sounds good. So you were actually born in Pakistan, immigrated to the US?
Yes, I was born in Pakistan. I've been to the Middle East, as a child. My parents worked there, so I've been traveling in college years, and then finally, U.S. is the home.
So what happened between your life in Pakistan? Something happened. Something changed your perspective.
So I'll give you I guess, a longer version for an introduction. So I grew up. uh, my the earliest childhood memories are from the 80s, early 80s. Both sides of both sides of my parents' family, they were not religious. So in the 80s, early 80s, I should say, nobody really, at least in my family, nobody really wore religion on their sleeves, and they were, pretty much nonchalant about what Islam says or how to do and how to behave and all of those. I was very close to my grandfather. He was a businessman, and one of his closest friends was a Hindu, in Karachi. So, I'm just telling this because it was a very different time. I never saw my parents. I mean, my father, my grandfather. I mostly grew up with my grandparents, and never saw them go to mosque except for Juma. Juma was, because it was Friday was the weekend, for most of Pakistan. So that's the only time I'd seen them go to pray. It was so religion was not shoved down my throat as a child. I knew that I was a Muslim because everybody around me was pretty much a Muslim. So that was basically how much I knew about Islam. Yes, I knew that I was a Muslim, but beyond that, all of the things that I learned about, you know, what the Prophet said about certain things were through the hearsay stories about, there was a, like the famous, there was an old lady who was throwing trash, and she didn't throw the trash one day, and he went to, so those kinds of like really um, nice, versions of Islam, and the Prophet was what I grew up as part of. um, and then so like in college days, I didn't really care much about religion. I was not religious at all. I knew I was a Muslim, and if somebody had asked me what your religion is, which was very rare, I would say I'm a Muslim. Not necessarily like I'm a proud Muslim and this and that, or preach about Islam, but like, yeah, I'm a Muslim. um, After that, so what happened is, I when I came to the U.S., I was here during 9/11, right? So I around that time I was working in Austin, Texas. So my name, my first real name is Tariq. Uh, a lot of people assume that I'm a Muslim, obviously, right? A lot of my colleagues assume that I, a diverse, friends, not necessarily just Muslims, but non-Muslims and from different parts of this world. So they usually would come to me after 9/11, asking me for like, hey, you're a Muslim, right? So is this true? Is that true? And I would be like so clueless, right? I'm like, I have no idea. So like I was, and then at that time, this was like 2002, 2003, around that time, I was like, I better learn a few things about
Hmm.
what because there were all these questions were thrown at me, and I felt really bad, that I should, like, it's kind of like you're expected to know something,
Yeah.
right? Right, you're an engineer, and you're expected to know a few things about engineering, and then you don't know anything, like, oh wait, I need to do some studying.
Yeah.
So I that's basically, so I was like, even though I was like a Sunni, grew up in Sunni family, as I mentioned, it was not really uh religious, Sunni family. It was, just, yeah, we're Sunni, we
Culturally
become
Muslim.
religious in Ramadan.
Also, like, it was interesting that you didn't just make up an answer, because a lot of Muslims, or even like anyone, would just make up an answer because, yeah, 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 no, 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 Islam is peace. It doesn't have nothing to do with that. You actually said, I don't know, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, because I honestly like had like some of the questions, like, does it say, like, I remember somebody asking me, does it say about kafir, that you're supposed to kill kafir? And I knew growing up in Pakistan that there's something, kafirs are going to go to hell and burn in hell and all of that. I didn't know anything about, like, does it, like killing kafirs, you know what I mean? So I was like, I was wanted to say no, it doesn't, right? But then I always want to give reference, right? Whenever I'm like saying something about some subject, I want to be like, hey, look, it doesn't say that, right? So, but I hadn't done my homework, so I was like, I don't think so, but I don't know, I have no idea. I'll get. So usually my answer would be like, I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
And so eventually, so around 2003 or so, I started like dabbling into like what Islam says about different things. At that time, I had a stable job. My mom was pushing me to get married and all of that. So I also like, okay, let me just see what the Quran says about um, who to marry, what to, like, just to see what it says, and also trying to understand. So I looked up, like, verses related to marriage, and I found, I don't remember which verse it must be, Surah Nisa. It talks about, it lists a few, like, people who Muslim men are allowed to marry,
Yeah.
and it mentions mamalakat imanakum, the Arabic word which translated to um, what your right hand possesses, right? And I was I was like, what does this mean, right? And this is my journey into becoming a Quranist. So I basically, whenever I like was trying to read the Quran, I had read the Quran in Arabic because pretty much everybody reads the Quran in Pakistan. As a child, you learn to read Arabic pronunciation and all that. So I'd done that, but I wanted to understand what it really means, because Arabic was not my language that I understood. So I'm trying to, I looked up what your right hand possesses, right, the English, and then just Google for that. One of the first sites that came was this site that I'm pretty sure a lot of Quranists, who are my age
Let me
might be
guess.
familiar with.
Can I
What is it?
guess?
What is it?
Can I guess?
Sure, sure, sure.
Is it submission?
No, so that was one of the sites, but no, the one that I really got caught my attention was called, and I just looked it up because it was active few months ago, at least, or a year ago. It's called the Free Minds with a THE, thefreeminds.org. And so there was an article about, like, they had different articles about different problematic verses of the Quran, right? Um, and so they wrote this long article explaining away what um, what the right hand possesses means. Basically, uh, I don't remember what the exact, explanation was, but I'm pretty sure that they just basically wash it off as it doesn't mean slaves, because um, most of their Quranic, interpretation was, around, this is not what it means. This is what the everybody's got it wrong. All the scholars got it wrong, but we got it right. And they had like a formula of, like, getting the word and then translating it literally and then matching it with other words, saying, hey, this word means this here, it cannot mean this in this context. I was not an Arabic expert, so I basically, like, oh well, it made sense. uh,
This is the website?
it is the let me see
Free
if I can
Minds,
find it.
yeah. This one
The
has,
free
it looks like
mind.
Quran only Muslims, eh?
Yeah, Quran on it, they were Quran. So for some reason that site doesn't open up for me. I don't know if
They
they're.
changed it to free-minds.org, or maybe that was the
Oh,
URL.
sorry. Yes, oh, yes, you're right.
Without the, yeah.
There was a dash in there. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. So anyway, so I found that, and I somehow, I mean, because didn't know much about Islam or Quran, I bought their, explanation of that verse, right? And then I was like, okay, who are these people, So I just looked at, basically went to their website and started, like, looking at different articles and, other articles, so I found out that they were mostly talking about why hadiths are bad in a way, right? They're not to be trusted, and they had all of the different things, to say about all the different hadiths. And so I was like, so I was reading some of those articles about, their case against hadiths, right? And I was shocked because they were saying, it says this in the hadiths, which is not in Quran. And I was like, wait, does it really say that in the hadith, right? So so this is mid 2000s, right? I mean, we don't have the sunnah.com at that time, the encyclopedia of, hadith books. There was no such, um, resource available to me at that time to. So I searched for, the hadith books, the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and I specifically wanted to search, the Urdu versions of that, right? Because I wanted to see, I wanted to compare with English, and because I spoke natively Urdu, right? So, like, I'm gonna try to, compare that. And I found a website, from, Sunni.com or some Sunni website, uh, which had the PDF versions, like, really large. At that time, internet speeds were not. I didn't have gigabit. It took me a while to download those ginormous volumes of, hadith books, and I downloaded and I just randomly opened, Sahih Bukhari to, like, some page, and I was literally blown away, by what I was finding in those, Sahih Bukhari, and Sahih Muslim. It was not like some other book. Like, this book was, supposed to be, like, the second after Quran, right? I was finding all these problematic stuff with, how to do things, like, very, tiny little details about how to sit, how to stand, how to drink water, how to urinate, how to, uh, take shower,
Mhm.
and all of those things. And it made no sense to me. And then basically that solidified my belief that, these books are not to be trusted, hadith books. And then that's when, I realized, I mean, I really didn't realize, but I was like, okay, I can simply discard these hadith books, as not true. And what I did was, when I found this out, like, in mid 2000s, I thought, wow, this is earth shattering. That, nobody probably has read these books. So whoever, I'll show this to, they'll be like, wow. this is what it says. We're not gonna, we don't, we don't really care about hadith books anyway. Like everybody would be like me
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you
yeah.
join me, right?
So can I pause there for a second?
Sure, sure.
So when you so here's what I'm wondering. So when you got access to these hadith books, you were seeing all of these crazy things. And what I'm wondering is, how did you interpret Islam without the hadith books? Because without the hadith, I mean, you have the sira, but the sira is the same. It's the same pile of crap, just like the hadith. I mean, in the sense of like the stories are just as bad. It's just not like incident by incident. It's just like a continual tale, right? So without all that, and if you're left with just the Quran at that time, how are you understanding that people are following Islam? Did you think everyone's following Islam wrong?
So I basically, as I mentioned, I was not very religious, so I didn't really care much about,
Um,
all that I did. So this is what I, personally, okay, I knew that there were all different types of Muslims who would be on a, there's a scale where like I'm super religious, I'm gonna go pray 5 times a day, blah blah blah, and just talk about Islam left and right. I was not like that at all. So I was like, okay, so the way I was when I became a Quranist, I was like, I'm going to look into Quran and see what I need to avoid, basically, and obviously, and so I, even in the college days, I drank alcohol. I didn't find any problem with that, with college friends and all that. So I actually found it really um, favorable in a way, and that Quran doesn't strictly forbids alcohol. There are verses, that one verse I remember, and also the Free Minds website also justifies that, saying, "Hey, alcohol is not haram because it says there are good things, there are bad things," and then they also give explanation about hey, whenever something is forbidden, Quran is pretty specific about it. Like, for example, eating pig's meat is strictly forbidden. Same with, like, blood and other things, right? Which is not the same language that it talks about when it talks about alcohol. So I was like, this is great, this is perfect, because it works for me, in a way. I was like trying to justify, like, hey, can I be a Muslim and
yeah.
also. So
So
I was not really worried about, like, hey, how do I interpret that? I was basically,
yeah,
personally, for me, I was looking at, like, what do I avoid?
right. And I want to kind of focus on that a little bit more. So why did you want to justify being a Muslim? Because I think this is important, because it kind of comes back to why people follow religions in the first place. Because you didn't choose to be Muslim out of free will, so to say. You were raised as a Muslim. You were indoctrinated. I mean, if I could use a little bit of a strong word, you were indoctrinated, or you were looking at social markers, as Yasukari would say, groupthink, right? This is groupthink. This is like but also it's not just social conventions. It's more than that. You believe this was from God, right? You were taught this is the truth from God, and this is something that we need to. Is that what it was? Like, why were you even going through this process? Because I think this will be like a really enlightening answer for people to really ponder on. Why would
So
anyone go through all the gymnastics to try to justify something that doesn't make sense?
So I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because, as I mentioned, that a lot of people are coming to me and asking me these questions, right? That was one reason, right? I need to, like, find some of the answers myself to be able to explain, to justify me being, a Muslim. And second was, eventually I was, I knew that eventually I was going to get married and have children. And, like, these same questions will be asked by my own children, saying, hey, daddy, we're Muslims. So what is Islam, right? And I'd be like completely blank. So I need to first learn it myself to be able to tell them, hey, this is what, you know, Islam is. I was always pluralistic when it comes to religion. So even from, like, the college days, I knew that when I do have children, I would never force, one religion on them. I would tell them about all the different religions, and then say, hey, this is what Islam says, and whatnot. and also likely not tell them until they're in their teens and whatnot about any religion. So that was like from very early, but I wanted to learn it myself just so that I can, you know, not only talk about it with people who actually ask me, not like preach to people, but mostly, answer, hey, does it say this? And then I could say, hey, yeah, all of this stuff is from Hadith, Hadiths are not really reliable. So, and that's how I would basically justify myself as being a Muslim, because it kind of like, um, it felt almost like, okay, I have to defend it because, hey, I'm calling myself a Muslim, right? I have to defend my position in a way, right? And that was my motivation. I would probably have never become an ex-Muslim, if I hadn't started, reading about Islam and Quran and Hadith. I'd probably be just the same non-practicing Muslim, calling myself a Muslim.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. So you wanted to justify it and be able to explain it, and also for your kids to know, right?
Right.
Yeah. So another question Dee was asking in the chat was, what did you think of 9/11 at the
Oh,
time?
so 9/11 was a very shocking. I was living in Virginia at that time. I'll tell you a very personal, story. I was so I lived in New York just a few months earlier. Drove, to my office, which was in Queens. Very, like I always saw the Twin Towers while I was driving. And so I was going to work 9 in the morning, around 8:39 in the morning, and I got a call from my office in Virginia saying that there's the office is gonna be likely be closed or something, because there's a plane that hit, in New York, and there's some chaos going. So I didn't really follow news at that time that much. So as I went into the office, everybody was glued. Like this was unusual. Everybody was glued to the TV screens in the office, and like everybody was sitting, nobody was working, everybody was watching the news because the second plane and had hit. And so they were like saying there's another one that is coming, because I was living close to Washington D.C. area, and there's another plane that is coming to the Washington D.C., and who knows what, how many planes there may be and all that. So it was really shocking, especially you know that time was the most one of the most difficult times for me, because people often judge, right? So they assume, even now, when I, with my name, Muslim name, people would assume that I'm a Muslim. People would, have certain labels, attached to, who you are, even though you're probably not that. So that's basically what happened. A lot of I personally didn't face any backlash. In fact, I'll tell you a really interesting story. I my parents were flying from the Middle East. I don't want to mention the country, to the U.S. to visit me, and their baggage got lost. So the airline just lost the baggage. So they gave my address. So they were going to visit one of their friends in Houston. I was in Virginia, and so they gave my address, saying, if this is the address, the address in the U.S. So the airports were closed, right? Because right after 9/11, I had a call from the airline to go pick up the they found the luggage. So on 13th September, I was scheduled to go pick up and the airports were closed, and I was like literally like, they're gonna like look at me like I'm a Muslim, and and I'm here to pick these, these baggages who don't, the baggage that don't belong to me. I was like, I was freaking out, And so one of my, colleagues, she was like, like, I'm gonna go with you, Tariq. Don't worry, we're gonna go together. Anyway, nothing happened. Not, they basically like there was it was militarized. The airports were militarized. It was Dulles Airport, right, in where one of the planes I think took off, and I basically the guy in military uniform asked me a lot of questions, like where do I work, who do I live with, when did I come to the US, what's my status, all of those things. And then like obviously like who this what are you doing here, what, what's your business. And because airports were closed, right, the no flights were going out still. I think it was 2 days after 9/11. Anyway, I got the luggage and everything was fine, but so I didn't. So the only thing that I faced personally after 9/11 was just this incident where I was like interviewed by a military uniformed person about what I'm doing in the U.S. basically.
Yeah, that's tough. And I think this story kind of highlights an important principle to me about activism, which is, and something we always need to remember, which is, I always, this is going to sound funny, but we're all Muslims.
I
We
know.
fall under the bigger umbrella, which is what in the world, in my ideal world, I would love to be in a world that I could be considered Muslim. Muslim. The 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 fact that people are culturally Muslim but not religiously Muslim, that doesn't quite exist in the world, in the Muslim world today. You're not allowed to be an agnostic Muslim. You're not allowed to be an atheist Muslim. In the ideal world, though, that shouldn't matter. Your beliefs about dogma, the dogma in your head shouldn't matter. Call yourself whatever you want, right? You're part of the community. But because we don't have that world, we have now, and personally, the other approach, of course, is just go the other approach. Say, I'm not Muslim at all. I'm ex-Muslim, right? Which is the approach that we're taking in order to gain a bit of, shine some light on the fact that you can leave Islam, right? So that's an important thing as well. Not everyone has to be Muslim, but for people that want to remain Muslim, I hope that that would happen one day without them having to explicitly be like, I don't believe in that crap, right? I'm just like whatever, right? So, and the discrimination can still happen against people that look like us but don't really believe in all that other crap, right? That's
Right.
the challenge, right?
Yeah, and let me also elaborate on how what I thought about 9/11 at that time. It was very confusing because I at that time, as I mentioned, I was born a Muslim, didn't know much about Islam, and all of these things were coming at me. Like these people were Muslims who did that, and it was very confusing. It was very disorienting, if I can say that, to understand, to try to wrap my head around, like why would somebody, doesn't matter whether Muslim, whatnot, right? What good does what how does it help anything, right? Because I couldn't figure that out, and that's exactly when, after that incident, I started getting more like questions, thrown at me, because hey, again, I had this baggage with me of being a Muslim, so I'm supposed to know why these other people who are supposed to be my following the same religion as I was, why did they do that, right? So yeah, I mean, it's just it was confusing for a lot of I'm pretty sure a lot of people like me who were non-practicing, didn't know much about Islam. It was very confusing. Now, what it did, I've seeing this, how America changed after 9/11. I saw, this is where I think this was the turning point where some people, some Muslims became more religious, you know, trying to justify, Islam and say, yeah, it doesn't say this and all of this. I think I'm sure that Quranists and all of these people existed before, but the all of these different, um, moderate Islam, came to surface, so to speak, where, you're like Muslimish, you're like culturally Muslim and whatnot, but like, hey, Islam is, oh, great. It's just another religion, people who still call themselves Muslim. So yeah, I went through that. So that was basically the way I was able to um, call myself a Muslim still, was that, this is not what Islam is, because Islam is Quran. Quran doesn't say, I mean, yes, it did say kill, right? It did say, which, okay, so this is, I'll tell you something interesting, is that when I learned about Hadith, my entire focus, and this is, I would have become an atheist long ago because I dabbled into atheism way back in college days, question of God, like whether God exists or not, and um, so I when I was reading up about Hadith, so my focus became Hadith, like debunking Hadiths. I did not really pay much attention to what the Quran actually says, right? It was mostly focused on debating with my relatives and friends who were Muslim, saying, "Look, why do you believe in this, hadith? Why do you believe?" Like, and pretty much none of those people, I mean, everybody who I was debating with was a Muslim, would ever tell me, "Look, Quran says X, Y, and Z too," right? None of them, because everybody believed in the Quran, right? So nobody actually pointed all of those things, and I never actually. So whenever I looked into Quran, I always like searched for certain words, and found, what the verse says, because there would be like multiple verses, one talking about X and one talking about Y, and third one talking about Z. Made little sense, but to me it was like, for some reason, it it was not as detailed as the hadiths were, which were like literally being very specific about, like, do this, and do that, so it was very like, chill kind of, you know guy, the god, of Islam, from what I experienced, because I didn't really look into all of the really problematic hadith, Quranic verses.
And that makes sense. So before we go ahead, there's definitely some other stuff I want to talk about in your story. I just want to say thank you to Clamp L. Binged all your stuff. Happy to see you live. Thank you. How do you guys cope with, this is a question probably that I'll let you answer, with unpunished crime, seeing people get away with the crime till the day they die? That's the only thing that keeps me wishing that there might be God. I know we're gonna get into the atheism thing, but you want to just, what do you think about this?
So as like, as an atheist, I don't I see that the world is unjust. It's not like there's no, I don't see that the world, I no, don't expect the world to be just, number one. So start from that, right? um if some so this is, it may be more philosophical, right? I know that somebody who commits murder needs to be punished, right? I know that. Now, the person who died or got murdered, that person is dead. For that person, it doesn't really matter. It has happened, right? We have this fourth dimension, which is time. We cannot travel backward to fix things. If that was possible, then that would probably be the answer. But I think, I mean, yes, I mean, we wish, I think that is the reason why religion exists, is because we try to give, this kind of like an safety net to our existence, that hey, things are not right now, and when we die, hopefully things will be better, or things will be, we'll get justice, and I think that's the driving force behind I mean, most religions, as I can tell, like why we live, and how to live, so that after we die, something's gonna happen, whether we get reborn, or whether we get justice from some some deity, right? So I think that's what it is. And for me personally, I know that, as I answered, I know that there is going to be an injustice. um, I don't know what's going to happen after I die. I don't have an answer, right? So that's where I leave it as, like, I don't try to create an answer to which nobody has an answer, and I know that, right? And that's basically where I leave it. I will find out what happens to me after I die. I don't really, I'm not really worried about it, to be frank, until that happens. I'll see what happens.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that you said, if I'm not going to make up an answer, just because this is a really important point that we atheists, we're willing to acknowledge a lot of times, that just because I don't have an answer doesn't mean your answer is right. Like, a made up answer is worse than just saying I don't know. And that's a good thing about being agnostic. It's like you're willing to say that. From my perspective, I would go even further than that, and not say, and say it's not even about punishment. I would say the entire world is a system that has consequences for actions, for environments. People that murder, you'd have to look into the whole history of that person, why they murdered, were they abused as a child, which broke the moral system in the brain, are they psychopathic, is it a reason why this happened, was like, in some cases even murder could be justified, right? I mean, depending on what self-defense, there's a lot of nuance needed there. And looking at things in terms of punishment, to me, is a very, it's almost like a religious way of looking at the world. Everyone needs to be punished, right? And maybe it doesn't need to be punished. We use punishment as a deterrent. So from that perspective, punishment is useful to human beings, that we prevent, we basically change the odds so that, if you do this, there is some consequences, right? We're using consequences as a way of kind of blocking bad behavior, or same thing with jail time, right? It's a deterrent. So all of that, and in a way, knowing that there's no divine justice, to me, that's makes it more important that we deal with stuff now, and that makes humanity m- ever more cognizant of the fact that we need to deal with these things, rather than leaving it for the hereafter, where someone will be like, oh, I know I got cheated, but God will deal with it, right? Oh, I know these people got cheated, God will deal with it. No, God will not deal with it. We need to deal with it, right?
This is the thing that really irritated me. Also, even before I left Islam, was this concept that, leaving it to Allah. Like, um, we do our best, and that best is usually not the best, because you can never, like, give up on whatever you're trying to do, and then say, okay, I've tried my best, I'm gonna leave the rest on Allah. And that really, that is the crux of the issue here, is like, uh, putting your faith, or whatever you want to call it, on an entity, whichever god you believe in. Some Santa Claus is going to come down the chimney and bring you gifts. It's a very old it's childish, literally. So I think people need to grow out of that. And if there is a god, let's say if there is a god, right, that god has to be much more intelligent than any of these gods presented by any of these religions. Seriously, he or she would understand where I'm coming from, would understand my reasons for not accepting, any one of these gods. And I'm pretty sure if there is a God, he or she cannot, or it cannot be one of these gods. So my atheism is solid on these religions. My agnosticism is on, hey, is there a God? I don't know. I mean, like on Dawkins' scale, I'd probably put myself, around the same. I think he put himself at 7. I'd probably put around the same. Probably even 8. For me, that I'm fairly certain. I mean, I'm 99.9% certain that none of these gods, including Allah, Yahweh, whatever have you, I know that they don't exist. They cannot exist logically. But that 0.1% possibility of, maybe something or something created this universe, right? Yeah, it's possible. Anything is possible, right? Until you rule it out completely.
Just for people that are not familiar with the Dawkins scale is basically this 1 to 7, um, I guess, scale of picking. It balances the ideas of agnosticism and atheism in a nice way. A lot of people say they're agnostic, and what they mean is they are weak atheists, right? They don't mean that they're agnostic. Agnostic is a different dimension on and then atheism, right? Like Gnosticism versus theism, right? So you would put yourself as a almost as a 7, you said?
Yeah, I had the scale wrong, I think. I was gonna say, yeah, I'm pretty much a strong atheist. I would still put it 7,
Yeah.
because when I look at okay, so when I look at atheist or atheism, I'm always looking at religion, like religions that exist today or existed, in the past, right? I'm never like, some have this concept of spirituality and like, deism and all of those, right? I'm not looking from that angle. I'm always looking at like the God, the typical definition of a God, a creator who's like out there, who does certain things to get the universe going. In that, with that, kind of God, I'm 100% atheist. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point too. As Pavel D was saying, if there was some sort of all-powerful magical God, I'd prefer preventing crimes over justice. That's an interesting way to put it. And D was saying God doesn't help, never mended a broken bone or paid for someone's meal. So, I mean, we're atheists here, right? I know obviously we have a lot in common with other believers that also don't like Islam, but being atheist, this is what we believe. We don't believe that actually God has actually helped in any way and intervened in any way whatsoever. I personally put myself as for the longest time, ever since I left Islam, I put myself as a weak atheist for the longest time. It's been like what, 8 years now, and now I've shifted, I'd say, to a de facto atheist, which is I know for certain, but I think God is very. I cannot know for certain, but I think God is very improbable. So I'm slowly shifting along a little bit. But anyways, enough of that. I guess if we continued with the comments on this topic, we can go on further. I want to go back to your story.
by the way, I just wanted to let you know, Abdullah, I'm not seeing the comments here on the StreamYard, so you'll be the one to
Okay.
bring up any that you want to. Yeah, I
Okay. No
don't
worries.
see
Yeah.
any comments here. So
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's continue with your story then.
all right, so I'm so like in this so like so far I'm like a Quranist. I'm trying to debate other Muslims. I'm never engaging non-Muslims because there's no point in talking about Islam because I was never like a religious person. I never wanted to preach. I didn't want to convert anybody. I wanted to I mean sort of deconvert Muslims who are still clinging to the hadith books, trying to get them to become more of a Quranist and then, say, hey, look, you can drink, you can, you don't have to do all of these things that the Quran doesn't forbid, you to do. So I had lots of, like back and forth with my own father in Pakistan, with many relatives, and at this time I'm married, I've got, my daughters, and the person who first made me question Quran was a Muslim, and was one of my in-laws. So he was very religious. He was from a Tablighi Jamaat, and very long beard, and I would always um, try to like get his point of view on hadith and like how does he justify, because I couldn't wrap my head around how people are able to say hadiths are valid when these all these other hadiths in the same book in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, they exist, right? So I was so he one day, like it was, I think it was 2016 or so, or probably earlier than that, when I was in Pakistan, and we were just walking, and he knew that I was a Quranist. Everybody in Pakistan knew that I was a Quranist. I mean, the word Quranist didn't exist at that time, I think. It was I mean, I didn't say I'm a Quranist per se, but everybody knew that I didn't, follow Hadith. I just completely, I literally bashed Hadiths, like threw them in the garbage. Right, I didn't really care much about it. And if somebody's feelings got hurt, they got hurt. I say I could always point to, like, look, this is what I'm throwing away. This is what it says. Literally had all those PDFs and stuff on my phone at that time to like pull it up and show it to people. If I'm talking to, like, hey, this is what it says. Um, so I was talking to him, and he's like, okay, so what is your main objection? Like, if you have to, you know, if you have to, like, have just one objection. He knew my position on that. Like, one objection, like the strongest objection to Hadith. What is that? And I thought about it many times, and I just told him, because the first Hadith book was written, I think it was Sahih Bukhari, was written 100 years after the Prophet's death. I think in roughly 100 years, maybe more. Who knows, right?
Yeah, yeah, there was quite a long gap between. Yeah, and Sahih Bukhari was one of the later ones, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, if somebody died, a century ago, what he or she said, cannot be, we cannot really, I mean, we even forget in our lifetime what somebody might have said. So my argument was this time frame. So then he goes and trying to, like, be the Muslim to convert back to the right path. He basically blurted this out, and this is what he said. He said, "But what about Quran? When do you think Quran was written?" And I was completely dumbfounded at that question because I never thought about that. I knew that it was, it was orally transmitted, so to speak, like from one person to other. But I had no, I never actually tried to understand when it was actually written down in like textual form. And I was clueless. And he basically further, like Quran was the same. It was written by the same Sahaba that Hadith wrote. If you trust the Sahaba for Quran, why do you not trust them for Hadith? And I was like, it made sense at that time. It made sense in the sense that why the hell am I following Quran then, right? Like, these same people wrote the Quran,
That's
not Muhammad, but people who were around him. Who knows who wrote it, right?
isn't
So
that isn't
that
that
was
I have to say something. Isn't that what you call a self-own?
I know. I was literally, yeah, he owned me. Literally. He was like, I had I was I was just silent.
Yeah.
I
No,
was
no, it's
like,
a self-own. Like he broke his own
yeah, I
argument.
know.
You're
Yeah.
saying Hadith is bad. He's like, well, what about Quran?
But
Because he thought you'd be like, oh,
he's coming from his he's coming from the angle that, oh, this should probably make me realize that my arguments are flawed, right? In fact, what I was thinking in my head was like, wait, you know I missed something. I need to look into this. I
yeah.
never actually paid attention to the book that I'm like, saying this is the correct, this is false. I need to look into this. So that's when I actually was like, okay, I need to the same thing that I did with the hadiths. I need to do this with the Quran, like find different things that are not right. So that was, that's when I started like, okay, I need to go, and I started like actually, and there's so many at that time there was so many Quranists, so many. So I read about, like, how they explain and all of that, and a lot of the explanation was like, this was always, protected in the heaven and came down on Muhammad, and and all of that. But obviously, I didn't buy that, right? And because it made no sense to me. So I was I started questioning Quran, right? I was like, okay. So one thing that I'll tell you, a lot of people would, used to, even my own father, his argument would be, okay, how do you pray then? Quran doesn't say, how do you pray? And my answer to him was, this is why I don't pray. This is not, don't ask me why I how I pray. This is why I don't pray like you do. I don't go and
Yeah.
bang my head on the floor and do this funky exercise kind of thing, yoga or whatever you want to call it. I don't do it because
Yeah.
the Quran doesn't tell me to do that. And that was basically what I was doing. I was like, okay, if the Quran doesn't tell me, I don't need to do it. I mean, yes, it talked about salah, and like, okay, for me, I would be like, okay, I'm just, like talking to God and, like literally mumbling to God. And that's basically, to me, that was like, okay, that's my prayer.
Yeah.
so, so that was, the thing I was, like anything that was not in the Quran. So then, um, I, I started looking into Quran more, and the first verse so I was at that time, what I was trying to do is try to find things that would give me clues to it being um, influenced by someone human. I mean, yeah, there were many. I mean, now when I look at it, everything is. But at that time, I didn't think of it that way. And the first problematic. I mean, I know there was all of these verses about women and all that were justified, explained by these Quranist people. Like this doesn't mean what it means. It means X, Y, and Z, right? So I bought that at that time. But what the first verse that really got my attention, because I used to think that Quran is like timeless and it's like a message till the eternity and whatnot, and and I could just use that as as some kind of like guidance, like how what not to do, what to do and whatnot. So I was listening to Quran, on my while I was driving, listening to translation, the English translation, playing it because I was trying to like trying to understand if there are something that I did had serious problems with. Uh, and the verse that really caught my attention was where um, I don't remember the verse number, but it's about Muhammad's friends, the buddies, so-called Sahaba, must leave his house. Um, I, I'm forgetting the details, like how it says it, but basically they must leave the house and don't stay past, the like the dinner or something, like once they've eaten, gotta go, go to your houses, right? And I was like, okay, why in the universe, a creator of the universe would think that this is something that to be sent over to humanity? Like it does not apply. Like I was trying to figure out how do I apply this to, like what is this verse trying to tell me, number one, and number two, obviously, like, hey, is this something that got inserted, right? And I also knew about some of these other Quranists, especially there's this group, French group, that actually has
Yeah.
one verse that they knock out. I'm forgetting the name. They say this verse proves that the Quran was. Yeah, this is this is
Yeah,
exactly what
so,
I'm
"O
talking.
you who have believed, do not enter the houses of the Prophet except when you are permitted for a meal without obeying its laziness. So don't come too early, dudes. And when you're invited, then enter, and when you've eaten, get lost and stop bothering him and asking him nonsense, okay? Indeed, that behavior was troubling for the Prophet, and he has no balls to ask you to leave. So I mean, he's shy of asking you to leave, but Allah has ball. I mean, Allah is not shy of the truth. So when you ask
So
his
yeah,
wives,
this is true. Oh, I'll tell you one more thing. So while I was a Quranist, for some reason I did not have this thing, this infatuation with Muhammad. I If I had to scale, like if I had to like put down all these prophets, I'd probably put, Abraham, because I didn't know much about him other than, yeah, he had, two sons and blah blah blah, and monotheist, the father of monotheism, so to speak, right? And there was not much about Abraham, even though Abraham is all over Quran, right? So I would put Abraham above, definitely above Muhammad. So I didn't have this like reverence for Muhammad, even as a Muslim.
Wow. So
Not that I would.
you weren't doing idolatry of Muhammad, which is, I think, what most Muslims are doing without acknowledging and admitting it. The funny thing is, when you actually bring this up, that you guys are worshiping Muhammad, they will be like, "Oh, you never understood Islam. Oh,
Exactly.
you're a fake ex-Muslim. Oh, you don't get it. We don't worship Muhammad." They'll tell you the party line, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But they don't. They're like blind to the fact that it's a personality cult. It's
right.
100% personality cult. They were even like drinking his spit and wiping on the bodies and like some weird shit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suspected, when I was questioning Quran, so this is what I suspected. I suspected that this dude, Muhammad, he must have, toyed with Quran. He must have just blurted out things that were not really from God, and he may have inserted, yeah, that's what I thought, this is
So
my like
basically,
kind of like leaving religion. At that time I was leaving Islam.
so
I still like,
basically,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I was still like not an atheist at that time. I was still like there has to be a creator, some creator, not necessarily, whatever you call, whether Allah, not necessarily the Islamic one, but like there's a creator. So at that time I was like, okay, this verse, like the one that I mentioned, and some of the other words that I later found that kind of benefit Muhammad. I mean, if you look at it, right? A lot of them actually, when I read it, as an atheist now, I mean, pretty much everything is like for Muhammad's benefit. um, so I looked at that. I was like, this has got to be something that Muhammad inserted or said, just to make his friends leave. Like, like I've got friends coming over, they don't want to leave. I want to be nice to them, right? What
It's
do I
kind of,
do?
you know what
I
it's like?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you get like a fake phone call. Like, hold on, Tariq, I listen.
Yeah,
Hello,
yeah, yeah,
oh, yeah, you need me to come over right now?
exactly.
Oh, this is Allah. Allah. Oh, Allah says you. Hold on, hold on. Hey guys, I have a message. Hold on. You want them to leave? Sorry, guys. Like, I was having fun, but you guys need to go because I got this guy's telling me you need to let you guys know that you need to get lost. Leave me.
Exactly. That's exactly what it. This is, in fact, this is what it is. This is
Yeah.
what it is. And
So this is the satanic verses, except with Muhammad. Basically, it wasn't Shaitan. It's Muhammad that's like inserting verses
yeah,
as I mean, that's you've now escaped the matrix, bro. Like this is now the point where you're like starting to
right.
you the first level up you had was when the guy said, "Yeah, but Quran has been transmitted the same way." You're like,
Yeah, and
level
imagine
2,
I'm in
now
this.
level 3 achieved.
Imagine the first person who puts doubt in my head was a Muslim, and I was in Pakistan. Like I read so many articles and stuff, and I had obviously come across apostate um, uh, the apostate prophet, and I had assumed so wrongly that he was a Christian. So I watched, and then I basically just shrugged him off, like, hey, he believes in Christian. I mean, I don't know. At that time, I don't know how and why I did that, but I assumed that he was a Christian. Um,
Yeah, he used
and so I
to.
didn't really pay attention to that. So there were lots of arguments against Quran in front of me. I just never paid attention to them until this point. Then I started looking into more, Quranic verses. So this was definitely one. Yeah, apostate prophet. Thank you, D. Um, and I was basically gonna say apostate Aladdin, because I've been listening to him. He's really doing great. Uh, so um, anyway, so I'm now this is I think now so I'm a father of two daughters. Thank you, Pastor Aladdin. Yeah, so I was um I'm at this point I'm like, okay, I gotta look into Quran. So I stopped, debating with Muslims at this point, because like anybody could, come and say, hey, what about the Quran, right? So I had need to really get my homework done. And I started like looking into Quran and problems with the Quran, and that's when I started also, finding a lot of art at that time in 2016. I don't know if XMNA existed, or I think they were founded a year later or so. But I didn't know anybody who was kind of like an ex-Muslim. The term ex-Muslim didn't exist in 2016. And around the same time, so I was the father of two daughters. I was married, and my ex-wife, I had been as a child. I had done Umrah many times, because as I mentioned, my parents lived in the Middle East. I'd been, I don't know how many times I've done Umrah in my life. So for me, and also especially since I was a Quranist, this whole circling thing around Kaaba and all of that was for me kind of like like didn't make any sense, to me. Even the Quran does mention that, but like I was like, okay, whatever, it didn't make any sense to me. So for my, you know, ex-wife, I was like, okay, she hadn't been to Makkah, Medina, and all the these places. It would be really, really um, she would love it, if I could take her, because we were planning to go to Pakistan with the two kids. And I'm like, I could just, make a plan it in such a way that we could also do the side trip to Saudi Arabia, and do this thing. And for me personally, and I don't have any shame in admitting it now, it was more of a like a kind of like mini vacation, so to speak. Like I'm going out to a different, country, like, hey, just, taking a break. Not really Umrah, because I was really not into that. Even at that time, and I was like, that this is the point where I'm like, I I was calling myself a Muslim, but I didn't really follow even the Quran. Like I was like, I had problems, serious issues with the Quran. So I'm in 2016. I'm in Makkah, doing the Umrah with my, ex at that time. And one of the first things that really caught my attention, and this didn't happen. So I went with like really expensive, uh, top of the line tier of Umrah. Their Umrah packages, how much can you afford? And I went like the full blown, 5-star. So I'm at this hotel, which is like really high, I don't know what they're called. They're like three or four hotels, this tall building right inside, the mosque. And my first glimpse outside the windows, it was facing Kaaba. I got that especially like, oh, this room costs a little more. I'm like, yeah, why not? Let's get that. So I go check in at the hotel and I look at Kaaba, right? I'm looking down and I'm up high above this so-called house of Allah, right? And it's tiny. I have a picture I shared on Twitter also. And I'm looking and like it made zero sense to me. Like this creator of the universe has this house, and I'm up here on in a room, hotel room, very high. It's kind of like blasphemy, in a way. Like you're above Allah in a way, actually literally above Allah, right? Allah's house, right? And I was like, and I always question this whole ritualistic aspect of Islam. So I'm like thinking like, that doesn't make any sense. Why anybody does this, tawaf and all of these things. Later on, the next day, we did the Umrah, and obviously my ex was in the women's section. I was,
Yeah.
in the men's. So I'm sitting down, and obviously, as I mentioned, I didn't really pray. I didn't believe in that, but I did that just because, hey, I'm there. Everybody's praying. I don't want to be standing there, so I just prayed. And like after the prayer, I'm sitting like this and just facing the Kaaba, and I'm looking at all these people around me, all the Muslims, like going crazy, tawaf and trying to, kiss Hajar Aswad and all of those, the chaos that it is. And I'm like, the first time I questioned, what the hell am I doing here? Literally the question, like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? It's kind of like one of those moments where you're meditating and, so to speak, like thinking about your life and and all of that, and I'm like basically questioning and answering, to myself. And
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, I'm here because I'm a Muslim, but like, what makes me a Muslim? That's the first time I really questioned myself as, why do I call myself a Muslim? Like, do I believe in this, kalama? I didn't believe in that because, in Quran, it doesn't mention La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul. It does not mention that. So I did not, as a Quranist, I didn't believe in this thing. And then all of the five pillars of Islam, I had problems with every single one of them. And like, I don't share anything in common with all of these people, whether they're Shia, Sunni, doesn't matter. I don't share anything. Then why do I call myself a Muslim? And this was basically my exit. I'm
Mm.
sitting in front of Kaaba, and I knew that I'm just basically calling myself a Muslim because I was born into this religion, and I don't need to use the label Muslim anymore. If somebody asks me what is your religion, I might put in, you know, no, none, as an example, right? At that time, I was not an atheist, I was still like, okay, there's got to be some God or something, So I'll pass for if you have any question, or if you want to take any.
Yeah, I do. So I want to say something. I want to say a couple things. One thing is, you've now achieved, I mean, it's going to sound a little bit over exaggerated, but you've now achieved enlightenment. At this point, you've taken the final red pill and you've escaped the matrix. I think that's such a good analogy because, despite the fact that this is accusation made against atheists with zombies, the fact is that to escape the indoctrination of childhood and the system that you were, when you were too young to understand right from wrong, you were put in this thing, you were told this is true. And then to step by step realize gradually that, it's such a beautiful story to hear that you're now at the final point where you're looking down at the Kaaba and like, what is this little thing? And then you're looking at all of these people going around, I'm sorry to say, like zombies, right? And you're like, what the heck? That's literally awakening. You woke up at the house of Allah, the most holiest place on earth, where there's angels going around everywhere.
I think Allah finally showed me the right path.
Yeah, you got blessed by Allah because of your desire to seek the truth. And I mean, when I went to Makkah for Umrah as well, I didn't go for Hajj, I went for Umrah. And I was like, I heard all these stories about people saying when they saw the Kaaba for the first time, they cried, right? And I'm like, please cry, please cry. I really want to cry. I want to have that touching moment, right? When I see the Kaaba for the first time, people pumped me up that the Kaaba, it's gonna have an impact, and if you don't, maybe you're just dead on the inside. It's kind of like the gaslighting. It's like, or even you gaslight yourself. You're like, or maybe I don't, my faith is not strong enough or whatever, right? So you set yourself up. And I went, and the Kaaba was there, and I saw the Kaaba for the first time. And you know what my reaction was? Hey, this is smaller than I thought. Like that was I was like, I thought this was like bigger than that. Like, and of course there was no crying. I mean, this was like, I was pure Muslim at the time. Okay. This was like, I don't know, 2013 or something. Like, I was totally Muslim. I mean, obviously I was going for Umrah, right? And and I was just like, it was just underwhelming. I was like, I mean, I still had the whole like, oh my God, I'm in a blessed place. And then, Muhammad was here and all that stuff. But like, it was just like a building. It's like, there's nothing special about it.
Right.
And let me contrast that to something else. Excuse me, which is also a human creation. The pyramids. I
Yeah.
also went to Egypt, also a human creation. But when I saw the pyramids, like it took my breath away. I was in awe at like, wow, this thing is massive. Like the
Right.
scale of the pyramids it's insane. Yet, the Kaaba, I mean, the funny thing is Muslims are all mad. A lot of Muslims are mad about the clock tower because it shadows the Kaaba, and it makes it look insignificant compared to this gigantic clock tower. But the reality is that's what the Kaaba is, right? It's just an ancient house of idol worship that has been reconstituted as the center of monotheism. But that's not what it is. It never was. It was just a house of idol worship, right? That Muhammad obviously reutilized to make it into something else, right?
I'll tell you something. This reminded me of my first ever, like, visit to. I was a teenager, or probably before teenage years, I think. I visited. My mother was with me. She had done Umrah before, but for me it was the first time, and she told me, because we were like driving, somebody was driving and we're in the car, we are like gonna go, we're going toward the masjid, and I was about to witness Kaaba for the first time. So she told me, it's over there in this direction, this window, you're gonna see. But as soon as you see it, this is what my mother told me. As soon as you see it, don't blink. Just, yeah, don't blink. Keep your eyes open. And all of these things Muslims believe in, and ask everything that you want to ask. Basically, like pray. Like, hey, God, give me this. At that time, I didn't have a lot of, like, things that I could, like, other than maybe, at that time PlayStation didn't exist. Like, I'd probably ask for that, right, as a child. But I don't know what I prayed, but, like, I saw Kaaba, and I'm like, okay, that's just a black wall. Because at that time I could only see the wall. That's just a black wall. Okay. And because I'd seen it before, but when you see it in, when, just like you, when you see it in person, it is really underwhelming, because this whole um, this awe surrounding, the magical aspect of it, it just shatters right in front of you, unless you're like a really hardcore um, believer who would like find things, in magical things in Kaaba, things happening, like people would say, look, the birds, there's a famous video, like the birds circling the Kaaba and all of those things, right? Anyway,
Yeah,
so
something like
to continue, if those Muslims still say no birds poop on Kaaba, well, I'm pretty sure the Muslims probably do, because hey, you need all kinds of reasons to justify all this, this belief, because there's got to be something to hang on to, and that's what they hang on to. Should I
mhm.
continue? Do you,
Yeah,
do
yeah,
you
yeah.
have?
Let's continue. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so this at this point I'm like, okay, I'm not a Muslim, but I don't know what I am. Like, I gotta have some label, And I'd already looked into Christianity and looked into other religions. I knew there was this thing called spirituality. So I dabbled into that. I couldn't understand it. Everybody's definition of spirituality was different, right? Everybody was like, this is what spirituality is. Some would say it's like meditation and blah blah blah. And I'm like, but yeah, that's meditation, but it's not like a belief system or anything, So, like, doesn't answer some of the questions about like the existence of God and whatnot, right? So I was like trying to, come up with something, and I couldn't find anything. Literally, I was like, okay, I know that I'm not a Muslim. I didn't have I didn't know about the label ex-Muslim, so I was obviously not. But I was like, okay, I found out that there's, um, this Islam thing is, just made up, But at that time, I was not really arguing or debating with Muslims. I'm like, hey, the reason I did not do it because how unsuccessful I was in convincing them about hadiths. I knew that if I talked about Quran, it would be useless. Like if I could not get them to leave hadith, my own father, if I could not get him to leave hadith books, when I showed him all of those, problematic hadith, like how the heck would I be able to convince about Quran? And then I realized that religion is a very, you know, and I was learning all of these things that religion is a very personal thing. Hey, if I left because I seeked and I sought and basically found what I was looking for. Other people don't seek that, right? And so if they want to, seek, they will find out, and they will, come to their own conclusion. They may not come to the same conclusion as I did, but I'm not gonna go ahead. I'm not gonna go waste my time trying to, tell people, what I think, because at the end of the day, I may be wrong, right? I always have this that whatever conclusions that I draw tomorrow, I may come up with something that shatters these conclusions that I'm making up today, right? So just like with when I was a Quranist, so I stopped talking about religion. I was just basically like you know studying religion, so to speak. Around that time also, so I also had a very negative view of atheism at that time. Again, as when you're growing up as a you know Muslim, you do you know you know so many words are used to describe like kafir and all that, right? So I used to think that atheism means that you're basically a believer who believes that there's no God. Basically, that's what I thought I understood atheism to be. And I'm like, how can that even be like how can I say that there's no God, right? Like just like I cannot like at that point I could not say that there is a God. So like how can I go and flip it and say there's no God, right? I don't have any proof. So I started reading up on, I read Richard Dawkins' book, and then read more about atheism and understood atheism. And I was not labeling myself an atheist at that time, but I was kind of like, okay, I'm atheistic in a way in my, thought process. There was an event that really went, that really in a way affected me that actually made me an atheist. And this was in 2000. So I did Umrah in 2016. 2017, there was a famous case of a girl. I think she was a Pakistani girl. She was, I think, 6 or 7, Zainab. And she was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by someone who was very much religious because he used to pray not, which is basically hymns to praise the prophet. And the reason it affected me is because my daughter at that time was around the same age, right? My oldest one. And so how it really affected me is because her parents, both parents went for Umrah, leaving her with the relatives in Pakistan, right? Now, less than a year earlier, I had done the same thing, I and my ex, we, flew to Pakistan, dropped the kids to the in-laws, my in-laws at that time, and then me and her went on Umrah. So my kids were, 2 daughters were, in Pakistan. And I thought to myself, this could have been my child. What would I do? How would I react? What would I feel that I'm there in the presence of God? At that time, as I said, I didn't believe in Islamic God, but I was like, okay, I'm going and doing something that shouldn't have should be positive for a God. Like, hey, I'm doing something, to to acknowledge a God, whether it's that the God that probably exists or not. So I couldn't understand how a God, any God, doesn't matter, would allow that
Yeah.
to allow. Um, I mean, I knew that kids get raped
Yeah,
and
terrible things.
murdered.
Let's not use that word. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
yeah,
sorry. Okay, so I'll be careful.
yeah,
I know that it happens.
yeah,
What I didn't understand, like when it happened to a very religious Muslim, the girl's father was very religious. 5 times a day and all that. And I'm like, if Allah, and I knew that Allah was, fake, at that time, but like whoever is the God, why could he not spare? Like why could he not intervene, right? Why could he not stop it? Like what good is that God, whichever God? It doesn't, I mean, a child to me doesn't have any religion. It doesn't matter, whether the child is born into a Muslim family or a Hindu or a Christian family. A child is a child. And if that God, doesn't matter which God it is, cannot do anything about it, then that God is worthless. That God is as good as a God that does not exist. And that was basically it for me. I knew that I was an atheist, for probably a very long time, because I was always questioning the existence of God. Way before, I dabbled into Islam, I was like, questioning God, and because I was into goth music and alternative rock, and some of the lyrics were kind of like blasphemous. So I was always like, questioning, like, hey, what if there's no God? I was always asking that question.
yeah. The existence of unnecessary harm does create a problem for theists. And, Yasukari says theodicy, the problem of evil, is one of the biggest problems for theism. It's a problem that doesn't go away, that can't really go away. I mean, Islam has its own answers to it. Bud Ehrman, the very famous ex-biblical scholar, I mean, still biblical scholar, not ex-biblical, he left Christianity because of the problem of evil, because there's no solution to it. Like, it's just not possible to explain away the fact that there's unnecessary suffering. Suffering may be necessary to lead to some better outcomes in some cases, but there are also examples of pure suffering with no benefit to anyone, right? And so you're left with a big problem of trying to justify why this had to happen, right? So, this suffering of children is a very difficult one. I'll just say a little bit more and then I want you to continue with your story. But there's this butterfly child, or the butterfly, this thing that the skin peels off of. There's a genetic disease, right? You just touch the skin and it falls off, right? And scientists now have come up with some treatment, for this genetic problem, that you can't imagine the amount of suffering that you have to put. People like us that are parents, we feel extra bad for children because we know what it's like to have children. Like, we empathize. Not, I mean, even worse. I mean, not even worse, but probably equally. I'd say the parents suffer equally as bad as the child. That, like, maybe even worse than the child, because you're so powerless and you can't do anything for your child, and your child is suffering. And so it's just awful, right? And so I totally empathize with this actually, making setting the stage even further for atheism, or even. But in a sense, if deism is true, that there is some, like, God that just doesn't care, that's still a possibility. But yeah, for the Abrahamic God, it's just out of the question at that point, right?
Yeah, and also my understanding of atheism was, as I mentioned, was wrong. It's like I'm not like saying as an atheist. I think a lot of people get the two word, agnostic versus atheist, very wrong. And I read not all the books, but many books on the subject, and it's pretty clear to me what it means. You have, I look at it this way. I look at agnostic as an adjective, like defining, what, the word, like I could be an agnostic Muslim, right? I could be an agnostic Christian. I could be so the same way I'm an agnostic atheist, which I don't usually use the full agnostic atheist, but that is implied because everybody has to be agnostic. Like even when you are a Muslim, there are so many different flavors of Muslims. You're questioning one thing, you're believing in one thing, questioning one thing, right? So you're always, there has to be agnosticism in every aspect of belief, because you cannot really believe in everything, out there, right? So yeah, I mean, I became an atheist at that time. I knew that it was, but I realized from my own experience that nobody can be convinced, that I cannot convince anyone. And also, it didn't make any sense to me to to even talk about it, because like, okay, I had this realization at the time. As like many people, many ex-Muslims, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who had this realization, and I knew how problematic it was. That it was really important that I don't bring it up with, especially with my relatives, with that I don't believe in Allah, because that's like so bad, right? Like, you don't believe in Allah, you're gonna go burn in hell and all that. Even though I was told as a Quranist that I'm not, I better be the right Muslim, become Sunni. So I knew that this was gonna be like further step down the hellhole, of Islam. So I didn't want to. I'm like, okay, I don't really care. I know that God may or may not exist. Definitely doesn't exist in this, in the God of the Abrahamic religions. I knew that for sure, very confidently. And so I didn't really care if there is some kind of God out there. You know, if there is, then And one of the things that I did, which I think I've heard some ex-Muslims do, is kind of like, like, I'm talking to like Allah, and like, not really talking, but like, I was basically like, the last step was like basically blaspheming Allah, like saying, if you're there, come get me if you can. I dare you to, in a way, like basically like that's like, okay, let me just test this theory, because there's always this little fear about, God, acting irrationally, throwing you into a, you know, um, somewhere, basically like giving you some kind of sign, so to speak, right? So that sign never happened, that nothing happened, obviously, and I was not expecting something to happen, but like kind of like for my own mind, I was like, okay, you don't exist, you just inside of the figment of my imagination. That's it. I mean, not just my imagination, but like I was taught to imagine Allah, basically. I didn't talk about it, and I was like, I'm gonna stay an atheist for the rest of my life, like closeted atheist, right? Because doesn't really matter. Now I have two children at that time. Now I have three, and so as my daughter, the oldest one, is growing older, coming to, closer to the teenage years, as is the case with Muslim parents, they want to teach the children about Islam, right? So this is what happened with me, where so my as I mentioned, everybody knew that I was a Quranist, including my ex-wife, and everybody else. So my ex-wife started to get my oldest one into Quran. Like, she needs to read the Quran. She needs to read the Arabic Quran, not the translation. And I was an atheist at that time, closeted atheist. So I'm like, I had a problem with that. I'm like, I don't want her to waste time reading this, Arabic she doesn't understand. And I try to explain to her, and she did not understand me, because she knew me as a Quranist, right? Quranists don't have problem with the Quran, and I'm like showing like, like this repulsion to Quran, the idea of like, Quran. No, 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 I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to teach my kids Quran, right? And so I was like, okay, let's hold off until she's, matured, maybe 18 plus, and then you can teach her. She actually wanted her to be taught by a mullah over Skype from Pakistan. And I was like, not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. So I was very much against that. I obviously shut that idea down, because uh, it is so toxic. It is so toxic. This whole culture of indoctrinating children is very, it's not just, so I knew that it was not going to be just Quran. It's going to be so many other things. How do you dress, cover your all of those things would come with it, right? I knew that it was not good. So I told her to, okay, if you want to teach her how to read the Quran, then you go ahead and do it, because you know how to do it, you know how to read the Quran, you do it. um, Unfortunately, yes, what happened is, I had more and more problems with the way she was, teaching my daughters to cover up and all of that. I mean, she didn't wear hijab, but didn't allow my daughters to, like when the oldest one, to wear t-shirts even, in the summer. And obviously, she knew that my stance against hijab was, throughout my life. I loathed the idea of hijab, and also because, back when I was a Quranist, there was no verse that I could find. There was covering your chest was there, but there was no verse that I could find cover your head. So I know that some say that there is some, I don't know, but I always like, no, there's no such thing. Um, so I was very much against hijab. um, so I told my ex that, she was free to do what she wants to wear, right? I didn't have any problem, if she wanted to put hijab on her. She didn't, luckily. I would be, um, I don't know, I wouldn't, I don't want to judge people, but like, I don't like hijab, to be frank. And then, so my daughter, having a dress code of, so to speak, put on by, my ex, was a big problem for me. I was like, okay, I need to. Uh, at that time, this was like 2000. Okay, so I was, one little side note was like, I was an atheist, right? And I had discovered all the X7A, and Hari Sultan is active at this time. This is 2019, 2018. And other people, ex-Muslims are pretty, X7A was probably number one, that I followed. And I I was traveling a lot. Every week I was out. I was a consultant, and I had this freedom where I would be like in my hotel room, doing whatever I want to do, like watch, these YouTubes, about ex-Muslims and all of those things in my own, my ex wouldn't know about it. My ex-wife didn't know about it. So I had this life, which was, my own private life, with where I was like, okay, I could be myself. I could explore these different topics, these different things. Um, but uh, pandemic happened, 2020, and everybody's locked inside their houses. I was not traveling at all, and I was wanting to, watch something on YouTube. For example, you were also, one of the channels I followed, obviously. And then I'm also seeing this thing, that is affecting my own children, from my, not only my ex-wife, but also, her side of the family had become very religious over time, and they were like pushing her to do certain things, because they're girls. They're supposed to be ready, for the, how it goes,
For the
so
marriage?
marriage, yeah, marriage, and also be like, modest, and you're
All
living in
right.
America. They could be, when they become older, they could go, like they could be very rebellious, right? You know what I mean? So, and I was very different. I never wanted to raise my children that way, even when I was a Muslim. So in 2020, I was like, okay, I have to make a decision. I have to come out of this closet. I had joined X7A, I think in August 2020. I'd been following them for a really long time. So I was like, I need to come, because this will be revealed eventually, that because I'm becoming more active in with the ex-Muslim community, so to speak, right? I need to, at least tell my then wife that, hey, who I am, right? So I slowly, gradually, started, teasing her about, the funny stuff that Allah does, like some Maulvi would be saying something, and I'd be like, look at this, like this Allah is so clueless, like I would point to funny things that are even like in Quran, right? And so a few times she ignored me, but like fourth or fifth time she like literally paused the TV, and she's like, do you mean that you don't even believe in Allah? And she literally asked me that, and this was that moment where I was like, okay, it's like, you're like, do I escape or do I face my, the the reality? And I was like, I made the decision. I told her, no, I don't believe in Allah. I don't think Allah exists. I'm not a Muslim. It was very shocking, obviously, for her, but I told her that I have, I told her that I hadn't told anyone except her. I mean, literally, I didn't. Nobody knew that I was an ex-Muslim, and I also told her it's nobody's business that I'm an ex-Muslim. And the reason I'm telling her is because I wanted her to know, and also I wanted my kids to know. This is very important for me that my kids knew that their dad was, had left a religion, and also be able to talk to them when time comes about religion, if they wanted to talk about it, right? Um, and not live this life, um, being a closeted atheist, and then all, everybody looking at me as a Muslim when I was not a Muslim, like living this life, wearing a mask, so to speak, right? So I told her, and I told her that, hey, do not, how this will be perceived in Pakistan, by all the relatives. So I told her not to tell anyone. And I was not hoping to convince her to leave Islam, but I was trying to convince her to understand why, I think Islam is false, right? So that for that, I gave her all the different things that I'd been researching and looking at, like all of the problematic verses, uh, one of the funny things, was that Allah comes out at night, listens to the prayers, and I was like, joking, like, like we like literally there's a 12-hour time difference between where I live in Seattle and Pakistan. So I'm like, the big question is, where's Allah? Right now it is daytime, but it's the middle of the night in Pakistan. Is he down there? Is he up here? Where is he? Like, so that was, one of those funny things where I'm like, okay, it makes zero sense. All of these other things, and I showed her all those problematic verses. Um, she was also, she was non-practicing and didn't know much about Islam, and just was a Muslim. So she went into like this, um, kind of like took it upon herself to kind of get me back, to the right path, So she ended up, without me knowing, even though I told her don't tell anyone, she told, because trying to save me from hell, she's like, she has to do whatever she has to do. She told, I don't know who she told. She told her first her cousin, her sister, and obviously once the somebody knew that somebody's husband is an ex-Muslim, or not an ex-Muslim, but an atheist, doesn't believe in Allah, that was wildfire, for like basically. Uh, anyway, so I'm not going to go too much into that because it's probably boring for the
No, no,
audience.
no, no. It's definitely interesting. I just wanna stop. We could stop here for a second and just kind of point out that what you were feeling was a very real need that people have, which I see all the time, which I had as well, which was the desire to live an authentic life. And many people struggle with like you said, you got to a pivot. You had many pivots in your life, and this is one of the big ones. But in that moment, you are now being confronted. Do you not believe in any of this? And you have to make a decision. I also experienced the same pivot with my ex-wife, where I was like, should I just like admit it? Should I just say that I no longer believe, or should I be like, yeah? Because in the beginning, for me, it was like, yeah, I'm doubting this. But the reality was the doubt had gone over 50%, right? So like it was more doubt in Islam that at that point, right? Eventually the scale flips, right? And now it's like you have less of a reason to believe than not believe. But you also want to be careful in how you convey that to other people that are tied down by religious dogma and able to really hold themselves back anyways. So you took the authentic one. Well, first of all, it affects your kids, like you said, and you want the best for your kids, and you don't want them going through that crap. I've also heard of other people that suffer with similar situations where one parent is religious and the other parent has to just put up with it. And in this case now, you made the decision to be authentic, and obviously to some extent she betrayed you and she spread this information. So what was the consequences of that? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I had muted myself. So, my plan was that I would, religion was a personal matter, and I still believe that religion is a personal matter, and that doesn't matter if somebody believes in something, as long as they're not affecting me, as long as they're not shoving it down my throat or my children's throat, right? I don't really care. And that's basically how I wanted to live the rest of my life, where I would be talking about religion if I need to with people who I'm very close with, right? And who want to talk to me, like especially my children, right? And so like I wanted to like not even my relatives in Pakistan didn't want to mention anything about religion because it was useless. It was completely my parents didn't want to mention that I left Islam because at this age they wouldn't understand, number one, and even if they did realize that Islam is false, it's very hard. It's very hard to live within a country like Pakistan, and you can't do anything about it. Like if I was an atheist, and I know many friends who are atheists in Pakistan, very good friends. It's very suffocating. It really, and that's what was happening to me. It was like I wanted to reach out to the community, and I could see the ex-Muslims exploding, even in 2019. I was seeing more and more people, ex-MNA and all of that, and I wanted to connect with others who were like me, and I couldn't do it until my ex knew, and that was one of the reasons, my motivation, and also to keep my children. Now, she, as you mentioned, she betrayed me by, I think her reasons were not, maybe not really betrayal, but trying to get me to the right path, basically. You know what? This is what happens, right? Like, I I still get text messages from people who know that, in Pakistan, who know that I'm an atheist, with prayers, hopefully Allah will show you the right path. And, I just ignore them. I mean, they are probably saying it, um, genuinely. They believe in this. A lot of people believe faith is a very powerful thing, right? And so I don't really respond. I don't argue. I only uh, so when she did this, it spread like wildfire. They convinced her that our nikah was done, over. She cannot stay with me. That
Can
somehow, and
you
this was happening.
Yeah, can you explain that? What does that mean your nikah was done?
Okay. So this is all happening behind my back. I had no idea. I was at this time, I'm like, okay, I was under the impression that it had been like, at that time, it had been like around 6 to 7 months. I'm like, oh, I didn't anticipate that she would take me this, casually, this atheism and all that. She didn't have much of a negative reaction to it. And, I let her do what she wants to do. And the only thing that I told her, was that I don't want my children uh, to be taught about Islam, because there's so many different versions of Islam, right? So so I just want them to learn about Islam or any religion when they're old, when they want to learn about it. And if they come and ask, yes, I know, I'd tell them, or whoever would tell about the religion. But I don't want them to be taught that this is how you're supposed to live, this is how you're supposed to dress, and all of that, right? So this was basically what I told her, and that was one of the main reasons why I came out of my closet, because it was important that I did that. Because if I imagine, I have met ex-Muslims who are closeted, still closeted in their senior years. Their children have become super religious, and they know that the dad is not a Muslim, and they hate the dad, and like because they don't understand his side of his point of view, where he's coming from, and all of that. So and I mean, I didn't know ex-Muslims at that time, because I was not really interacting with anyone. But I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I spoke out and came out and didn't live this life. Nobody knows when anyone's going to die, but whatever number of days and months and years I have, I didn't want to wear this this burqa over me of being a Muslim. You know what I mean? So like uh, so
That's a that's an amazing analogy, the
right,
burqa.
exactly,
It's
right,
it's basically what it is. It's suffocating you, right?
yeah.
It's limiting your autonomy. Now, listen, you just why don't you just be quiet about Islam? You don't want to hear about Islam. Just keep it to yourself. Which means be limited by Islam, be limited in what you can do. And that's what they're trying to tell you. Like, just be quiet, right?
Yeah. So I was, to cut the story short, because I had very um, uh, difficult years after that, because I was my ex told some of my in-laws are in Canada, in your city, Toronto, and they understood the U.S. system. She was the so I don't have any relatives in the U.S., which is a good thing. She didn't have any relatives in the U.S. So we didn't have any relatives anywhere in the U.S. in all 50 states. And the closest in-laws, the closest so-called relatives were in Toronto, so they understood the U.S. system. So they told her, just literally throw me under the bus, because he's a kafir. You don't really have to care about him. Just put all the charges that you can use the U.S. justice system. Um, File domestic violence, and literally, I was accused, and this is, I'm a consultant traveling across. I had security clearance. I still do, and I was accused to be a drug addict on a court filing by her. Like, when I saw that, the level that people can go to protect this Allah, or the religion, I was like, this is so toxic, this is worse than I imagined. So obviously, that all of that is over now. So this is 2021 January. I I had a case, false case, against me, and then, later on, divorce case. And I had to present an argument, the real story about why my ex was doing what she's doing, because she didn't mention religion, because, she knew from all of the guidance that she had, that do not mention religion in any of the court, because, in America, it doesn't really matter what I believe in, right? But I need to tell the real story to the judge. And the problem I had as a closeted ex-Muslim was that nobody knew that I was an ex-Muslim. I didn't, she was the first person who I mentioned that I left religion. So nobody, if I go and tell somebody that, hey, I left religion, it would be after the fact. Like, now that I have this divorce going on now, that, and it could be seen like, hey, I'm making this up now, in a way, like, hey, to save me. Luckily for me, that I joined XMNA in August 2020. So I reached out to the XMNA community, and especially the leadership, that I need help. I have, I joined the community uh, before this whole thing happened. What can you do? Like, how can So I think I basically so they Muhammad Syed and Sarah Hader, really I cannot say enough praise. They were the only ones. I mean, obviously, they were the ones who I reached out to because I didn't know anybody in the ex Muslim community. Within 24 hours, I had a letter on XMNA letterhead, stating basically that I joined the organization, that I was, uh, vetted to be an ex-Muslim, basically proving that, hey, there's this other side of the story which my ex hadn't mentioned, and this is why. And also the letter, gave very detailed, references to how ex-Muslims and atheists are treated in countries like Pakistan, right? Which was very important for a court to see, for a judge to see, because a lot of the judges in the court system here, they don't really realize, how difficult it is to leave religion. I mean, yes, it's difficult to leave religion in even in America, like if you're a hardcore Christian, right? But it's not as bad as in Pakistan. You literally get uh, mob justice, in Pakistan, right? So that letter really helped, because I had to have somebody who can tell, not just me saying, hey, this is all of this is because I left religion. you know I had our marriage, like, was for like 12 plus years, so it was not like, so this thing happening was the only reason it happened is because of the religion. Obviously we had differences, but there was no such thing as like literally going and accusing the other, your spouse of doing X, Y, and Z, which were not true. I was able to prove every single allegation, and throw it in the judge threw it out, and only the divorce case continued. But from January 2021 is when I was literally kicked out of my own house, because this is I didn't know anything about it at that time. That this is how it works. The law, you even if you falsely get accused, you will be proven guilty, so to speak, until you prove your innocence. Right? And that's what I had to do. Um, you know, prove my innocence, and I had plenty of things to show to the court, um, and ended up, now I'm divorced. Um, my ex had the custody of the children. She prevented, the children from seeing me, and at that time, because of all of those allegations against me, right, the judge wouldn't grant me any visitation, because if I'm a drug addict, alcoholic, you know the whole 9 yards, right, dangerous person, why would any judge allow children to be seen, by me, or so within, like, I stayed, like, I could not talk to my children for 2 months, which was excruciating. Everybody sided, because she didn't tell all the neighbors and people here in the US, didn't know the full story. A lot of people just believed she's a woman, I'm a man. From Pakistan, yeah, most likely he's a drug addict. So, I mean, this is the perception, right? Like, people from, like, they have this, like, if, there's also this, as XMNA talks about it, we talk about it many times. You've talked about it. There's a lot of the anti-Muslim bigotry, right? So I'm treated as a Muslim, obviously. Like, within this thing, I'm treated as a Muslim. Like, I'm a Muslim man.
Yeah.
I'm
Can
not a
I
Muslim man.
can I say something?
Yeah,
Yeah, this is an assumption that people make about us when they see us, brown guy.
yeah.
Like, I was getting my haircut yesterday, and nice lady was getting me a haircut. She's like, talking about some of these things, and she's like, "Well, did you want your ex-wife to work?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Yeah, but like I always hear about people that in your culture." She said, "Your culture." they don't let the wives to work, right? And I'm like, my culture, like I'm actually from Kenya, first of all. I'm pretty liberal and whatever, right? But then on top of it, she was like, yeah, but then even some people born here, and then I started laughing. It's so true because they bring these values here. And I'm like, yeah, there's some extreme conservatism in the community. And what I want to say as well is the worst thing about this that's happened to me. So I'm also fellow divorced dad. Someone was asking, does everyone have an ex-wife here in the comments? I think it, obviously at a age as well, it's also more likely. But in this case, there's some commonalities, there's some situations. Obviously, I can't talk about all of it. But the thing that killed me, that really bothered me, was the first time this happened was when I first left Islam. I had all these Muslim telling my wife at the time to leave me because I was ex-Muslim. And the thing that bothered me was, like, I'm a good dad. Like, I take care of them. And she knew this, right? So that didn't cause my marriage to break down at that time. But like a similar type of situation happened that you went through, I also went through, where there were like, luckily it didn't get to the point of domestic violence charges because my kids are older, and that you can't do that in that situation. When your kids can see what's going on, it just doesn't work, because you look like a true criminal if you do that in front of big teenage kids can see what's really going on. But the thing that kills me is all these people that claim to be the best community on earth, the ummatan wasata, the middle nation, the ones that enjoin good and forbid evil, the ones that are supposed to speak the truth even against themselves, just quoting the Quran, right? There's good things in the Quran. All of this stuff goes out of the window, and you get instead tribalism, us versus them. These stupid fools are taking away the father of the kids that need a father, that would be much better off with an atheist dad than even an abusive Muslim dad. They'd be better off with an atheist dad that's a good dad, that takes care of them, that spends time with them, that spends money on them, that's there for, like, it's insane. And and I'm pretty sure in your case too, your ex knew you're a good dad. She knows that for a fact. Yet they're playing these nasty games. Some of it is because of Islam. Some of it is just it's a power trip, right? And it's trying to use the system against you. But the good thing is, the good thing is that ultimately, it doesn't always end up this way. But ultimately, if you're a good person, if you're a good father, if you're like a good dad, all of these things work in your favor in the long run. The problem is when the pig drags you through the mud, you spend a lot of money and time and energy, and you miss out on time with your kids, and you have to go through the system doesn't know in the beginning. The system will just assume that. And even in my case, my lawyer also told me that there's an image issue here. In my case, my ex-wife was white, so there's an image issue of a white woman with a brown guy. Of course people are going to assume certain things, so I'm already guilty just from but the good thing is, in my case at least, the system was pretty decent, and eventually, I don't want to say justice was served, but like, it ended up positively, right? Like, I still see my kids and everything. And in your case, you have your kids as well, so yeah, so please continue.
So I was obviously I went through this hell, and which basically got me out of my closet. I was like, I didn't want to talk about Islam today. This thing wouldn't be happening. This live had some Muslims, number one, didn't tell me that the Quran was had the same problem, and others, falsely accusing me to pretend that, just to give it back to me, as a punishment. Anyway, so I knew that at the end of the day, I will win, because although the U.S. justice system is slow and lot of problems, which I found out. I knew that ultimately, if you follow the law, I never did anything to break the law. I've lived in this country since late '90s. Not once had I any problem with law. So I knew that, I had my track record of living in this country, and all these accusations against me. So she didn't file for
Yeah.
like she didn't file for like domestic violence, because she can prove them. I never, hit her, never. In fact, one of the things that I had problems with my ex was, early on with my children, she wanted to discipline them by hitting, and I was very much against it, and I told her, this is, I don't like, that my children, I mean, there are many other ways to discipline. So I was very much against hitting anybody, whether they're your children or, your spouse. There's no chance. And so she didn't, luckily she didn't put it there that I hit her or anything, which I never did, but she did put a lot of other things like mental abuse and blah blah blah. And again, as I said, drug addict. I don't know why, but like I think there were like check boxes, and like it's a standard form that the county provides. Like, okay, is your spouse a drug addict? Check. Is your spouse an alcoholic? Check. So basically, what they did was just basically checking the boxes. Like whichever box they could fit. They even I never owned a gun in my life. Okay. Um, I have lived in the U.S. I've never owned a gun. Never had a license. Never had the need to go, buy a gun or get a license. I was, so in the document it was put there that I had firearms. I may possess firearms. So I'm sitting my ex went to the neighbors with the kids one morning. Sunday morning, I wake up, find that I don't see my then wife and my children. I had three children. I mean, I have three children now, and I don't see them. So I'm like basically searching the house. I was upstairs, and I came downstairs looking for them, and then I called her, and she's like, "Oh, I'm at the neighbor, next door, and then the kids are playing with the neighbor's kids," which is rare. Like that never happened. She never took the kids to the non-Muslim. She was very much like Muslim, non-Muslim. And this was like kind of late, so I was like, that's pretty sus. And even though I was like never doubted that she would do this to me, like 12 plus years of marriage, right? I mean, like, no, she was not gonna throw this under the bus over me leaving religion. Long story short, I found out that that was basically because I was left Islam, and everybody in her side of the family, they didn't bring it up to me, but I knew that that's what's going on. Um, three, like a couple of weeks went by, 2.5 weeks. I was living in my house by myself, no contact with my children, and I was filling out, the forms for divorce because at that time, like, I got to file for divorce because I didn't see anything that could, change, because it was like it was not gonna work out. Doesn't matter. So I was filling out the form, and I had a knock on my door. There were two police officers, and they told me the one who was, a little further, he had his hand on the gun. At that time, I didn't know that there were these domestic, abuse charges, filed against me. He basically told me, "You have 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes." I'm like literally, I'm in my shorts, in my house. You have 10 minutes to grab two pieces of, luggage or whatever you want to grab. 10 minutes, you got to leave the house. I didn't know that this was possible. I did not know that you could be thrown out of your house, your own house that you pay mortgage, and everything, over false accusations by your own spouse. I didn't know that. I was so not prepared. And I said, okay, let me go grab. So the police officers, because she put it there that I had possible firearms, right? So they came prepared to pretty much do whatever they want. If I had if I had one misstep during that interaction, I'd probably be dead in my own house. Because you see all this thing that happens in the U.S. where somebody gets mistaken for doing something and they get shot down, and they're dead. Uh, I was shaken. Obviously, didn't anticipate that. So the police officer walked with me throughout the house while I'm collecting the two, not just one, two police officers. One of them always had his hand on the gun, and I could sense that like he's ready to go. Like if I step somewhere where I'm not supposed to step in my own house, he might shoot me. And I was so what I did is, number one, I grabbed the passports, my passport and my children's passport, because at that time I knew what was going on. I had, understood that this had to do with Islam. I knew that there was genuine reasons for my ex to kidnap my kids away from me. Which, I mean, she hadn't allowed them to talk to me for 2+ weeks. So she would just come and grab the passports and go. And in Pakistan, I could not do anything. There's no legal recourse that I would have as an atheist.
Yeah.
Um, so I grabbed the passports, number one, and the passport were in a safe, safety box, or what do you call it. And so I grabbed that, I grabbed just a bunch of clothes, and I just drove out. Because I was also, it was in the document that I had only one car, one SUV. We didn't, because I was traveling most of the time, so we had only one car. uh, in the paper, she demanded the car, but somehow the police neglected and they let me drive. Otherwise, I'd be standing with two suitcases right outside my street, with all of the neighbors looking at, like, what the heck is going on, right? And imagine all the judgments that people pass, right? Two police coming, with full force. um, it was pretty embarrassing, and luckily I was allowed to leave with the car. And then later on, they realized that they were supposed to not let me leave with a car, with my SUV, but let me just walk and call, maybe Uber or something. I go, and this is my situation. Nobody knows that I'm an ex-Muslim. Nobody knows what the real story is. Not even my mother didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it. So I'm like, what do I do now? Like, I was already had a law attorney, divorce attorney. So
Yeah.
I called him, and he was like, see, I was telling you, you need to rush, fill out that form, before she does. And now it's, like, that's the situation. I'm like, yeah, anyway. So I
So before
go
you
to.
continue, if I just
Yeah.
want to step in and say a few things. Isn't it interesting that a lot of these people hate kafirs, or maybe hate is a bad word, right? They're like, it's us versus them, yet they'll use the system,
Yes.
the kafir system, that
Yes.
they hate you. Okay, they definitely hate you. Maybe they don't hate all kafirs, but you especially they hate.
Yeah.
But even the system, the American system, they're not obviously, outwardly they'll say, "Oh, we hate America, we hate this, we hate that," but then they'll use the system against you as much as possible. They'll basically scamming the system, right? That's what they do. They're using it to the advantage. And I want to say one more thing, which is that, we both know Stephanie, right? And we know that this, like you just hinted, that the kidnapping and the situations, we both know about people that is more than just Stephanie. I mean, we know multiple people that lost their kids completely. They're kidnapped, sent to a Muslim country. If you were in a Muslim country right now in Pakistan, and okay, I've heard also examples of this, but maybe you can just tell me, like, what would have happened if she did this while you were in Pakistan and living in Pakistan? Let's say you were an American, you were Pakistani, you lived there fully. She leaked this information that you were atheist. What would happen to your kids and to you?
Let me also, since you mentioned Stephanie, I know
Yeah.
Stephanie met her. And when I joined XMNA, Stephanie was managing, a lot of the, XMNA stuff. And I watched her video on, how she lost her children, right? So her story also made me be a little more vigilant about, like, grabbing the passports. If I hadn't, and I wouldn't have thought about it, if I hadn't watched her, story about her losing the children. And I'm glad that I did, because, yeah, what would happen is she would take the kids to Pakistan. And unfortunately, this is so frustrating. And again, goes back to the US court system, because one of the things that I specifically wanted in the final divorce is that um, none, I mean, obviously I didn't have to, I could not say that only my ex is not allowed to travel outside of the US with the kids, like take the kids outside of the US. So the language is like neither parent is allowed to, take the kids outside the US. And it was so hard to try to explain to my attorney, my own attorney, to explain to the judge that it doesn't matter if Pakistan is part of, they say, is it Geneva Convention or some convention? If I don't know which it is, like they look it up and they're like, oh, Pakistan, no problems. We cannot put the wording. We can only put that countries that are, there's an agreement between countries that, some child kidnapping laws, right? And Pakistan is part of that. And if I had a hard time convincing the judge, like, through my attorney, that we need to explicitly include, like, I either want Pakistan to be in that document that cannot take the kids to Pakistan, or like not leave the US. That's it. That'll solve the problem, right? So yeah, what would
Yep.
happen is that I would have no recourse. If she had taken the kids, I would probably not be able to see my kids ever again, because if I travel to Pakistan, um, just one word out that I'm an atheist and a blasphemer. Like, if you're an atheist, you're automatically a blasphemer, right? I mean, you're rejecting, Islam. That is in a way blasphemy. So yeah, that was the thing.
Yeah, so as bad as your situation was, ultimately there was a happy ending to it, right?
Right. So after 1.5 years, like started in January and then ended in January of 2021, ended in June of 2022. I finally got full custody of the kids, got my house back. I was, all through this time, I was living uh, in an apartment by myself. I was allowed to see my kids only once in 2 weeks, only for the weekends. Finally, I was able to prove to the court that I'm a better parent. I mean, obviously there was no she. I mean, I don't want to go into the details, but the Islam can drive you crazy. Um, and again, one of the solutions, that so-called solutions, is that leaving everything to Allah will solve all the problems. So what happened was things were not going right, and it was Ramadan to 2022. You know how Ramadan affects Muslims. It's the holiest of the month, right? So what happened is, uh, my ex stopped sending the kids to school. It was April. No school, no notice to the school at all. Like, she had the full custody. I was just visiting, seeing the kids over weekends. So the school district starts calling me as a like the second parent, so to speak, right, or the other parent. And like, your kids are not coming to school. It's been 2 weeks. The teacher emailed me, one of my children's, like, I haven't seen your daughter. I hope everything is okay. And I knew this, what was like, I kind of knew, but I didn't anticipate that, she would just stop sending the kids to school. Um, Around the same time, you know, on my Facebook, I'm part of the neighborhood, Facebook group. I was alerted by one of the neighbors. She pinged me saying, "Hey, looks like this post, is about your wife." At that time, she was still my wife, and then a lot of the people didn't know that we were going through a divorce, right? And it was basically, she started playing loud Quran 24/7, volume level 100%. So those same neighbors who were siding with her, thinking that this woman has been, um, who knows what happened to her, what her husband is doing, they realized they realized what they that they were wrong. They all basically contacted me saying that like basically telling me that this is what's going on. They didn't realize that I was separated from her, not living with her, and I had no control over what she's doing. What happened is there were a lot of complaints to HOA and all of the things, and I knew that something is going on. She had cut off all contact with her own family. At that time, I don't know why, but so I was basically fearing for the safety of my children, because I was allowed to see them every 2 weeks on weekends. She did not let me see the kids. Like after that Ramadan started, 2022, something flipped, and I was not allowed to see the kids. I had no contact with my kids. So at that time, I filed another petition with the court. And as you mentioned, it's costly. I I posted on my Facebook how much it cost me, this whole ordeal, which should not have happened. Like it was not my fault. I mean, I didn't do anything to anyway. But that's a besides the point. So I petitioned the court saying, "Hey, my kids are not going to school. They're I don't even know if they're what kind of situation is in the house, because basically she had them locked inside. They were not going anywhere. No friends. She had already not allowed them to make any non-Muslim friends. Because for the fear that those non-Muslim friends would have influence over my kids, get them the kafir ways, because I didn't
Yeah,
want them.
you can't have non-Muslim friends, but let's call the police and use this kafir.
Exactly,
That's exactly what I was
exactly.
talking about. This
Yeah.
this is proof of what I was saying.
Use the U.S. system to your advantage. Use the all of the features that it provides. Use America, the shield that it provides to you, where your own religion provides you zero. I mean, I could have literally said 3 words, you know, and I told this, that I could have just said 3 words and be done with it. I mean, I don't want to put it this way, but like that's what Islam is, and would not have given anything, other than mahar. Mahar is usually nothing. So, but they use the U.S. system to, when it works for them. I mean, and I'm not trying to blame all the Muslims. I'm not. We don't want to, say Muslims do that. I'm just talking about the specific, the situation where you want to use uh, the kafir system when it works for you, but then bash that kafir system when it doesn't work. Like, what kind of hypocrisy is that? Anyway, I won the custody, obviously, because it was not, after 1.5 years when kids didn't go to school. My kids were, in special the program, which is advanced program, like one grade ahead of. So my oldest one was really good with math. My middle one was really good with reading, so she was already ahead, like 2 grades ahead. Because of missing school, their grades literally went down, and they had to go back to the actual grade that they were assigned for the next year. But everything is going superb now. So with that, the court still gives leniency, like the benefit of doubt, so to speak. So they allowed her to come to the courthouse and present her case, which she never did. And eventually, what ended up happening is she got kicked out of the house. Um, I mean, obviously, first I got the kids custody, and then when I got custody of the kids, I petitioned to the court like, I'm living in a 2 bedroom apartment, with 3 children. I need the house. So it was pretty much a slam dunk, case. So I don't know, that basically that was the end of my ordeal, so to speak. And since then I've been speaking out, and I wanted to come to your show and others, but because of this pending divorce and who knows what, the legality of all different things, I was not sure how much I can talk about it. But whenever I came, I wanted to talk about it. I didn't want to, like, say I can't discuss this. So now that I can talk about it openly, And I decided, hey, this is the best time. This is the right time. I've had my kids for more than a year now. June 2022 was when I won full custody, and they're doing great. So I'm really happy. I'm very you know happy with my life. And even though it was difficult, I think in retrospect, I should have taken the step to come out of my closet earlier, honestly. And that's one of the things that I think, I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have kept it to myself. So I say all those people, just to all those people who can. I am definitely not talking about people in Pakistan, or in countries where it is really not it is really difficult to speak out. Do not. I say, if I was living, I've told this many times, if I was living in Pakistan, I wouldn't be talking about it, because again, your life, your family, your kids, they come first, always. So your safety should be number one. And but if you can talk about it, I think we should talk about it, and there shouldn't be anybody telling us not to. And if the more people tell me that I should shut up, it actually makes me want to talk more about it. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I can see the motivation where it's coming from. Obviously, it's important, and the more people that come out, as there was a comment earlier, the more of us that are able to come out, the better it is for everyone else. Let me see if I can find that comment. Okay, I lost the comment, but there some other comments that were interesting that are worth talking about. Then we can end. I saw a clip where Mufti Menk said that over 50% of young Muslims in the UK no longer attend prayers, especially Eid prayers. The youth seem to be liberalizing over time. So we are seeing this movement towards, more and more people leaving Islam. It's actually a really good thing, right? It's also another good comment that you don't need like a whole degree in order to debunk this stuff, right? Excuse me. All you need to do is think without confirmation bias and rationally investigate, right? It's true because you don't, even if you had, say, for example, there was a book on physics, right? And there's this whole big book, but there's like one obvious mistake in it. That obvious mistake, you don't have to be necessarily a professor to know that, right? You can always see that that particular case is wrong. And unfortunately, with a religion that's from God, or fortunately, it's not even the case of, like, human beings will make mistakes. That's understandable. But with God, he can't make mistakes. So even one mistake is enough to say, to throw into doubt the whole thing. Either it's not from God, Muhammad inserted verses, the companions didn't memorize it properly, it wasn't written down properly, the scholars tampered with it. There's a whole line of things that could have gone wrong between when the religion was revealed and where it is now, right?
True. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's all about, yeah, just like, not Delulu mentioned. I get when I was a Quranist, I often got this, like, you're not a scholar. You haven't studied all of the hadiths. All of they call it exegesis of,
Yeah.
so there's a word that they use, like,
Tafsir? Yeah.
no, there's like, they say science of hadith. There's a
Yeah.
science behind hadith and all of that. You have to study that and to understand. um I'm like, okay, like, I usually would shrug, because I knew that there was re- growing up in Pakistan, religion is always a part of, like, people around you, and all the different people will give you different things. And I'd grown to kind of like shield myself from that. Like, I don't listen, like, in the way, like, if somebody's telling me you're supposed to do X, Y, and Z because Islam says that, I would not. Usually, I don't argue. I didn't used to argue. I would be like, okay, and then basically just not ignore it at that point, so that, I knew that it doesn't really go anywhere, because you can't really. But I think it's important now, but that we talk about it, because it has become. I mean, few people realize how toxic it is, and a lot of people don't, even non-Muslims, even, uh, people who are not Muslim, and especially they would be like, okay, why do you want to talk about your previous religion. I've heard that not just from Muslims, of course, wouldn't say that, but even from Christians. Christian acquaintances. And like and I tell them that I will stop. I will stop until when I don't hear um, preachers. I don't hear people preaching. If they want to stop me or others, not talk about leaving religion, then they should stop talking about people getting into the religion, or like s- you know
Dawa.
dawa, or whatever. The Christian, there's in America, like Christian fanaticism is also a big problem. So I see that side too. Like Jesus is everywhere, literally.
Yeah.
And luckily, I'm not so. As a father, I don't tell my children what to think, and I think this is a very popular saying now. That I teach them what to think, and what I don't discuss, religion per se, but they obviously know that I'm an ex-Muslim, and that I'm an atheist. They know that. My older kids understand that. My youngest one, is too little to know, but I want to raise them with a questioning mind. I want to raise them to question everything. And it's funny that when I one day I was telling my kids to question everything, and then backfired because they were questioning. I was telling them to go to sleep. It's time for bed. They were like, okay, but why, daddy? Why do we need to sleep? Like I had to go answer. Anyway, so like it's important for parents. I know that a lot of ex-Muslims are single, and that's one of the things I was trying to find other people who were also parents, also had similar. I've found many fathers and mothers who went through this ordeal because of their apostasy. Yeah. Apostasy, the word, by the way, I was going through like a lot of agony, like literally a mental breakdown, so to speak, in the early stages, right? So I had to tell my company that I, need to take a break, from, because this is the early on when I was like thrown out of the house. And so my company, it was a big multinational company that provided also therapy services, like free, to the employees. So a lot of people suggested, I go through therapy. So I was talking to the therapist, and I was telling, it was a video call and chat based system, and I was telling her apostasy, and she was a PhD, you know. Unfortunately, she didn't know what the word apostasy means. It's like so unheard of in the US, right? Like,
Yeah.
like
Archaic, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like she's like, can you please type what you're saying? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. So I typed, and then she's like, oh, like it was, the reaction was like, really, like that's the reason. And like anyway, so it's important to talk about it. It's important in especially in the context of Islam, that we talk about it. We need to get Islam, we need to cut the teeth of Islam and get it down to its size, that where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And other religions have, you know, especially with Christianity, they can openly talk about it. We need to literally do the same thing, and it's happening. And the more people come out and speak out, and we're not making stuff. We're just, all we're doing, I mean, all that I've done is just point to what the scholars are saying,
How
what the
dare
books
you,
are
you Islamophobe, quoting from the Quran and quoting from the Hadith, like,
Right. In fact, I've defended, like anti-Muslim bigotry is a thing.
yeah,
Like I had like, nobody, when I go out, if somebody sees my name, they assume that I'm Muslim. I'll tell you a very funny story, right? I had a colleague who wished me, and I shared this on Facebook too, who wished me in April, Happy New Year. You know, she was a new colleague in the company, and like, Happy New Year. Like at the end of the call, she said, "Hey, Happy New Year." And then the call ended, and I was like trying to process in April, who the heck wishes Happy New Year? Why the heck would you tell me specifically Happy New Year? It turns out it was it was the Islamic New Year. It was a Muharram,
Yeah.
you know. And so the problem is like nobody knows in the US you don't fill out religion
Yeah.
anywhere on any form, right? But you get assumed to be a Muslim, right? And
Yeah.
same thing, like you get stereotyped, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah.
You put into the same bucket, just like you were mentioning. You know, we're all Muslims, right? We get thrown into the same bucket, right? Whether it's a good treatment or a bad treatment, right? It's we're gonna get the
Yeah.
same treatment. That so my goal is not to cause any pain to Muslims. You know, I have my relatives who are my parents are still Muslim. You know, a lot of my friends are Muslims. I definitely don't want to cause them pain, but I do not want my right to speak about Islam to be taken away. I mean, I live in a free country and I want to exercise this right. And I think everybody who has this right, everybody should have this right, especially those who have the right, who live in a free society, need to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's important, and especially for those who are living in societies where this is not allowed. So I also speak when I talk about Islam. I also speak sort of on behalf of others who cannot speak, you know. And many times, during my I don't want to call it activism, but like however many times I've been on social media, I got many friends, and they tell me that they cannot even like my post, but they appreciate that I say this because even if they like my post, others may see and judge because they live in Pakistan, so it's important that we at least speak out, those of us who live in the West or in the free society.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say the funniest thing happened, the most awkward situation is when they assume you're Muslim. They're like, "Oh, should we order the halal food for you? We have halal food here." And you're like, "Oh my God, get me the bacon and pepperoni sandwich and the freaking pint or something." Right? You're like, and they're like assuming you want like this. It hasn't happened to me in a long time, but sometimes, they try to be nice, but like it just makes you uncomfortable, right? Has-
I'll tell you something really funny. But I think Toronto area especially has a lot of Muslims, and somebody came to visit me from Toronto, and there's this. I think is it Popeye or some
Mhm.
restaurant?
Yeah,
There's
four boy.
such.
Yeah, 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 yeah. We have that. Yeah.
So what happens is they in Toronto area. I've been to Toronto a few times. They're all halal. Every single one you go and you just assumed halal, it's halal. They probably have. So they came to visit me and they were like, okay, let's go. And they saw Popeye, like, oh, we're gonna eat here, chicken, it's really good, and I knew that they were like, and at that time my ex, I was still married, and I knew that she had a problem with halal, like not eating halal. I'd never had any such problem with like halal, non-halal. I always just I still did not eat pork or bacon as a must. When I was still a Quranist, for odd reasons because the Quran forbid it. Go figure it out now. Like why? I can't really justify it now, but like so they ate and I was like, okay, they're eating, and at that time I was like pretty much not a Muslim. I was like, okay, why are they eating this? Like, couldn't understand why the hell are they don't eat anything, that is
It's
not
halal.
halal.
Yeah.
They're eating this Popeye. Later on, I realized that all of the Popeye restaurants, or well, I don't know how they
Popeyes. Popeyes. Yeah.
Popeyes, right? They're all
Yeah.
halal. They assume,
Oh.
coming from China, they assume that this is halal. I mean, Popeyes halal, And then after they were done eating and like savoring I was like, okay, by the way,
You
in
told
the
them?
US, this chain is run by Louisiana. There's a company called Louisiana something chicken. Not halal, by the way, not halal, but tasted the same, I bet. you know.
Why did you
Oh,
ruin
God.
it for them? You should have let them eat it in happiness.
No, I did let them eat. I let them finish, and
Yeah.
like, and then told, yeah, because I was like, seriously, like, okay, go have at it,
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so I do have a question I need to ask you, which is about Quranism. Question for Tariq, is Quranism the way for Islam to survive or to wither away? And this is reminiscence from Turkey.
So I think I've met a lot of people who eventually leave Islam after becoming Quranist. So I think I look at Quranism, or as a stepping stone, so to speak, toward, yeah, exactly. Hassan Radwan said it, perfectly. It's kind of like you're in a position where you're trying to, like, okay, I am born into this. I call it cult now, but I didn't used to call it cult, but it's a cult. I am born into this cult. Now I need to justify the leadership of this cult, or all of the different things. Now, how do I do? You see, you're basically, what you do is, you find all these problems, because there's problem, plethora of problems in Islam. You find the bulk of the problems are found in hadiths, right? Hadith books. What do? Then, the easy route is like, hey, because Quran is so vague, it's not, I mean, it's like going all over the place, and one word's talking about this, other words talking about something else. So it's like really not, it doesn't make any sense to a lot of people. um, they basically say, okay, I'm a Muslim, and I'm gonna be, I don't agree with all these things, because all of these things come from hadiths, right? And they get to, like, um, still call themselves Muslims, but not be aligned with all of these other, the baggage that comes with being a Muslim. Like, a lot, even though in Quran, there's still a lot of baggage, like slavery, and um, um, sex in with slave women, and all of those things, right? Women rights, the division of property. One of the things that I had really hard time as a Quranist was this thing about division of property. Like, when I was like, I had daughters, and I was like, okay, like, I was just reading, like, what it says and all that, and I was like, why the hell? And luckily, I mean, I don't know if I should say luckily, but I had, I had daughters and not sons. But I was like thinking, if I had a son, then it would be so unjust to divide. Let's say if I, leave something behind, it would be so unjust that I would leave less for my daughter and more for my son, just because, he happens to be a male, right? So that was, all of these things are there. I think it's a stepping stone.
Yeah, totally. So we'll end it off on that. Any last words you want to give before we
No,
end?
I think I really good. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm glad that we were able to do it. So really, and would love to come again someday. So whenever you want to discuss something else, I don't want to bore with my story. Even if we do it again, we can probably talk about some other stuff.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, it was actually a really interesting story, and it's a good example to highlight how the reality is for ex-Muslims, some of the challenges we have, why we need to talk about Islam, why you had to come out or how you were forced into coming out, the impact on your children. There's so many learning lessons in a story like this. The way of getting out of indoctrination, the reality of Umrah. Like, there's so many gems from this like one story that, like, it's now been 2 hours and 40 minutes and we're still talking, right? And it's like, I had a feeling it would go to 2 hours, but like it just time went by so fast.
Yeah,
And from that perspective, I do think that, these stories are helpful, because also some people, like you said, let's call them white people, the general population doesn't understand that, because they're living in, more or less a more rational to some extent, a more enlightened society where you leave a religion and you leave a religion. It's like no big deal. Nobody knows what, like you said, the funniest thing, like what's apostasy? It's like fornication. Oh yeah, he did fornication. What's fornication? Nobody even knows that word is.
Right. Yeah,
You know? So
exactly. Yeah.
it's been useful. It's been a very not useful. It's been very enlightening,
Yeah.
educational talk, I think. And there's still so many comments that I started that I wanted to talk about. We're not going to get time now. So definitely next time we can talk about, um, more topical topics, right?
Sure, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it was a pleasure to be on, here and to share. I a lot of my friends know about my story. A lot of my XMNA friends know, but I think this is the first time I'm telling publicly, like at a platform like this. So yeah, it's important that we talk about it. So yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining, John and Dee, and everyone else as well for commenting. The comments and the discussion gets this show to more people. So thank you for being active in the chat. It's also fun, chatting while these things are going on. Appreciated all the super chats as well from everyone. If you're not subscribed, I don't know why you're not subscribed. Please subscribe now. This is a new channel. It's no longer new, but it's still my new channel. As Tariq was saying, every time he looks up Abdullah Samir, he gets the old channel. It's like, no, don't go to that channel. I'm not using that one anymore. Friendly Ex-Muslim is a new channel. Yeah, do more live streams. I will be happy to get back into it. I'm honored that this was, Tariq got me back into doing live streams. So for sure, we'll try my best to keep up this. Abdullah Gondal and I are like, every single time we tried to do this, we just couldn't get this happening. But inshallah, we will have some more coming soon. Everyone, thanks for everything, and Tariq for being you were a wonderful guest, and we'll definitely see you again.
Thank
Okay.
you, everyone. Thank you, Abdullah.